4 years ago, I'm driving across the Colorado and New Mexico border late at night at about 4 a.m. and I'm looking for a place to stop for fuel. I happened along the smallest and saddest little farm town with only one little gas station, and I had not seen another car for hours, and it's freezing cold outside. Now this town felt like a ghost town, almost abandoned, and it was very quiet. As I'm pumping away, feeling like I'm all alone, I notice another car over in the shadows near the back of the building. A flashy black lowrider with completely tinted windows, and 4 men that looked like they were right out of a Mexican gangster movie. I remember laughing because 1, they startled the hell out of me, and 2, they were wearing black shorts and wife-beater tank tops with knee-high socks, very cliche. And it was freezing cold outside, and they looked so casual for being in the middle of nowhere. And without a word, all 4 of them got off of the car and walked straight towards me. And it was then that I saw the full sleeves and face tattoos under the lights of the pump. So I dropped the gas pump and fired up the motor to my car, and I did the greatest 0 to 100 that car had ever seen. And not 20 seconds later, after I burned out onto the highway, I see the headlights of their car swerve out and start to follow me. Luckily for me, they did not know that my beat-up-looking Dodge had a Hemi motor inside of it, and they never stood a chance. After a few miles, their headlights disappeared into my rearview mirror. I didn't really think much of it until I asked an old cop buddy of mine, and he told me how the Mexican drug cartels used to run drugs through there to avoid the interstate, and suddenly it wasn't so funny anymore. My young wife and I were moving between cities, and we had spent all day loading this large 16-foot trailer with all our belongings, and we began to drive across the state just before dark. I'd borrowed a large pickup truck to pull the heavy trailer to our destination, so the combination of this truck and the fully loaded trailer was very heavy, which made the truck pretty slow and cumbersome to start and stop. We were traveling along a very desolate stretch of highway at just about midnight, driving roughly 60 to 65 miles per hour, when I see what looks like a couple of large deer walking out into the middle of the road just ahead of us, maybe about 200 yards. My wife is asleep on the seat just next to me as I begin to slow down a bit and lay on the horn to scare the animals off the road. Where we live, this is a pretty common occurrence, so I'm not slamming on the brakes because I expect these deer will move just before we get to them, because they usually do. That's when I come to the realization that these deer are not deer, but it's 2 very large men, and they're trying to stop us. This is only a 2-lane highway, and 1 man is standing in the middle of our lane, and the other is standing just on the opposite lane, just to our left. By now, there's no way I'm absolutely going to be able to stop this rig, and they aren't giving me anywhere to go, and they don't realize that I can't stop. I stomp on the brake and continue to blare the horn over and over again as fast as possible, hopefully trying to get them to move out of the way. I'm fighting to keep the truck and trailer from jackknifing with the brakes locked up and tires screaming, but these guys just will not move out of the way, and I'm still going about 40 miles per hour when I reach them. The only thing I can really do at this point is try to thread the needle between them, So I centered the truck in the middle of the roadway and hope neither of them tries to close that small window. At the very last second, the guy who's standing in the middle of our lane jumps out of the way. He was so close I was worried that our big rearview mirror might hit him right in the head, and I missed him by just mere inches. Keep in mind, this all happened in the time span of about 5 to 8 seconds. There was no car anywhere else on the road. We were way out in the middle of nowhere. And it was pretty obvious based on their behavior that these two guys were up to something potentially nefarious. I didn't stop. I'd come way too damn close to killing these guys, and my heart was in my throat. It was pounding so hard I was having real trouble breathing. I hadn't even realized until afterward that when I'd slammed on the brakes, my wife had slid off her seat and onto the floor. This was before seatbelts were mandatory. She groggily gets up off the floor and asks me what the hell happened, because she had missed the entire ordeal. I live in one of the biggest cities in southern Arizona, commonly referred to as the concrete jungle. There's not much that really happens here within the city limits, but if you go far enough in either direction, eventually you'll just run into rural areas with a whole lot of nothing in the middle of nowhere. On one such night, I was at home wanting to go out and get one of the local cravings from the local cuisines that is offered here in my city, but I wasn't old enough to drive yet. So I asked my sister and her older boyfriend, who was about 17 at the time and I was about 13, to take me out so I could get something to eat. And afterwards we decided to go for a little bit of a drive to the far eastern part of the city, where you see a lot of nothing beyond the city lights. And it was on this particular night when I'm sure I came in contact with something I can only describe as a skinwalker. We had taken the drive out to the outskirts of the city on the east side when we came across a crosswalk where a young woman, about maybe 17, 18 herself, was crossing, and it looked like she was sleepwalking. She did not respond to us slamming on the brakes because we didn't see her due to her wearing nothing but black clothing in the middle of the night. She continued walking down the street when I said to my sister and her boyfriend, "I think that girl is sleepwalking and maybe somebody is looking for her." So we had turned down the street where she had headed not too long after she had crossed and could not find her anywhere. It was at this moment that I looked to my right outside the window from the back seat of the car and saw what looked like a coyote with glowing yellow eyes. And it started following us as we quietly and slowly rolled down the street looking for this girl. We had gone to the sheriff's station that wasn't too far from the place that we had stopped and indicated to the sheriff that we think there might be a missing person roaming the streets who appeared to be sleepwalking. Nothing ever came of it, and no girl matched the description of anybody who was missing or that lived in the area. To this day, nearly 30 years later, I'm still not quite sure what we saw that night. But I hope we never see it again. I went to college about 4 hours away from my hometown, and I would occasionally drive home for the weekend to see my family and all my high school friends. My parents are divorced, though still lived in the same county, and at the time my dad was living in a rather small apartment, so I would stay at my mom's ranch house out on the countryside. One such weekend, I had been out late at night techno bowling with friends and was driving solo back to my mom's during the wee hours of the night. Being that my mom lives out in the boonies, it wasn't uncommon to not see many or any other cars on the road during this drive. So I'm driving along these country roads minding my business when I notice that I'm being followed by another car. At first I didn't think too much of it, but when I notice that the other car starts to swerve behind me, it gets pretty close to my bumper, definitely too close for comfort, and just constantly swerving back and forth between the two lanes. This goes on for a couple miles on these deserted dark country roads and nobody else is around. At this point I'm pretty freaked out. The car isn't making any move to pass me, despite having ample opportunity to do so. And there's no way I'm stopping or pulling over or going home in that case, just in case it's somebody who's following me and wants to do something nefarious. So I start basically driving in circles, making as many turns as I can, trying to lose this guy. No luck, he is still glued to my bumper and he's still swerving in and out of the both lanes. I decide to start heading back into the city where I'd been hanging out with all my friends, and at this point it's very, very early in the morning, but the city is serviced by a state highway, which is a 3-lane interstate. I figured getting up onto a higher speed with a more well-lit road with other cars around might make this guy back off, but he still follows me, matching my speed. He follows me again for several more miles until I, in a fit of panic, pull a move that might be questionable safety and legality-wise when I decide to swerve across 2 lanes to hit the exit ramp at the very last second, which surprised the car behind me as they missed the exit that I had taken, and if they wanted to continue following me, they would have to go near the other exit several miles down the road. Now that I'd shaken my swerving companion, I went straight through town on the regular roads, probably going 40 miles over the speed limit to try to get back home. I make it back to her house without further incident, even though my skin is still crawling, and every pair of headlights I see behind me on the way just makes me more paranoid. And to this day, I still can't drive at night back to my mom's on the countryside without thinking about it. Now, I never saw this car again, that I know of. This happened to me this past Halloween. I'm commuting to work in a different city as I'm working the 3rd shift from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. And as I hate the hours and the drive home, but the pay is pretty solid. So I get out of work after my Saturday shift, and it's now 3 a.m. on Sunday morning of Halloween. As I'm getting on the highway, I realize what day it is, and I'm just glad to be on the highway and out of the city center without any traffic, drunk, or cops. Now, I live in the Midwest, and that's the worst time of the year to be driving at night around here because of the deer that are running around. And since hunting season hasn't opened yet, their numbers haven't quite been culled. There's been deer carcasses scattered all over the highway for the last couple of weeks, so I'm making sure to be super careful on this drive home. I have my cruise control on, and as I'm barely going the speed limit, in about 20 minutes into my drive, I see 2 sets of headlights overtake me just a few minutes apart. The first just keeps going and becomes a set of taillights ahead of me, which causes me to relax a little bit because now I have someone in front of me to keep an eye out for the deer. I like to refer to it as having a fullback, and once this other car is a good way in front of me, I speed up a little bit so I don't have to be as paranoid. Now that's when the second set of headlights overtakes me, except they don't. As they were about to pass me, they just end up sitting in my blind spot for about a mile in the other lane. And I realized that every time I speed up, they were trying to stay behind me, matching my pace. It's a rundown black Jeep that pulls up next to me that's matching my speed, and I notice that their cabin light is on, but the windows are so fogged up that I can't really see anything. Which I thought was a bit weird as they were driving side by side with me, but I didn't really put any extra thought into it. I hit the deacceleration button on my cruise control, which caused them to eventually pull past me. Now the Jeep never changed lanes, and it eventually caught up with the first car that had originally passed me miles back. And I watched as both set of taillights just drove right in front of me side by side. I start to realize how weird this whole situation is, and it's at this point I realize I'm going about 75 miles an hour, because I was trying to keep the distance between us small enough that deer wouldn't be likely to run in front of me and onto the road between the two of us. That's when the first car hit his brakes and pulled into a rest area, getting away from the Jeep. It kind of bummed me out because now I realize I need to slow down to avoid the deer that might come up in the lane that's in front of me rather than the car that's on the left. And I realize I'm pretty rapidly catching up to the Jeep that was matching my speed earlier. No matter what I do, I still seem to be catching up to the Jeep, regardless of the fact that I'm slowing down, now going about 55 miles an hour, when before I had been going about 80 not just a minute ago. Alarm bells start going off in my head, and I reach back to make sure that I have the Louisville Slugger that I like to keep back in my car, just in case. About 30 seconds later, I catch up to this Jeep, and we're only going about 50 miles an hour at this point, and they're still sitting in that left lane. Right as I'm about to catch up to the Jeep, I gun the engine and shoot past them. There's an interchange for our major interstate just a few miles ahead, as well as a way station, which usually means there's going to be a state trooper or two just sitting there hanging out. It's then that I realized that the reason that the original car had gone into the rest area is because they were likely as sketched out as I was. Then the Jeep goes flying past me, and this time it keeps going, and I lost track of which way they had gone and where their taillights were. And I see two semis just ahead, about a mile down the road before we hit the way station. I'm not sure what that really was going on that night, whether it was somebody who was drunk or just somebody who wasn't paying attention, or somebody who was actually looking out to do something to harm someone, given what day it was. Pretty anticlimactic ending, but if you had been there in the moment, you would have realized how creepy it really was. It's affected my ability to drive late at night, as it just creeps me out doing so to this day.